Oi oi, it's your boy, the Pat Sabatini of having a fat sack and weenie, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following what many are calling the worst Apex fight card of the last 7 days. Yes, because we're currently in the middle of a patch of absolutely terrible UFC. The UFC is in a generationally awful run of events. And to be honest, it's partly luck, because they've been booking cards like this for a good while now. You know, go back to the famous Mick Maynard tweet. Mick Maynard being like, I thought all these fighters brought it. Go on, tell me I don't know how to do my job, blah, blah, blah. The UFC, one of two matchmakers in the UFC, whose job is not to find the best to fight the best, but to find the guys that he can employ for 10 and 10. To fight guys who will also fight for 10 and 10, and also try and make current guys who are paid more than 10 and 10 lose so they can cut them. I said it 5 years ago. Everything in the UFC is an exercise in cost cutting now. We've quietly stopped saying fastest growing sport in the world. And now most of UFC and TKO and Endeavor's advertising to investors is, look how little we can get away with paying these fighters. And look how cheap it is for us to run events. And look how governments or local governments will pay us to come to their shitty town to put on our shitty cards. So I was away last week. I don't know if Usyk versus Moreno was good. I was hoping it would be, because it's Usyk versus Moreno. I enjoyed a bit of Rising on my holiday, but Rising's always good. So I came back this week and we jumped right back into it with a god-awful card, headlined by Lerone Murphy versus Josh Emmett. Lerone Murphy, I've given the benefit of the doubt quite a lot, because for a long time, don't jump down my throat telling me he's been in a car crash. Sean Strickland was in a motorcycle crash. Doesn't exclude him from criticism for being boring. But Lerone Murphy has had a fairly inactive run in the UFC. You know, people joke about him being the 40-year-old prospect. I think he's only 33, but this is the lower weight classes. Wins in title fights at the age of 35. I think there's been like 3 ever. It's vanishingly low in the lower weight classes. Lightweight and under. So if we're going by those rules, his prime is coming up or being used up fast. But he's 16-0-1. He's very good. He's just a bit frustrating to watch. I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions on this fight. I think the main thing I took away from this was most good strikers, even if they're known for not being able to knock people out, it's not always the case that they don't have any power. It's not always the case that they don't hit people hard when they do hit. It's more a case that they don't capitalize on their advantages. I'm always talking about pushing your advantages and how some fighters are just awful at that. Like Sergio Pettis had the least urgency of any fighter I've ever seen. But there's been heaps of guys in boxing, kickboxing, MMA who have been even surprising hitters, but terrible finishers. So Gray Maynard is a great example from MMA. I swear he used to drop people in every fight, but had a 100% decision rate. Because it's not all about how hard you hit someone, it's about how often you hit someone, how you react to having hit them or having hurt them. And I was watching a load of Willie Pep this week, who was known as not a hitter. And Nicolino Locke, both defensive savants, neither known as a knockout artist or even a decent hitter. But Willie Pep will crack people, particularly when they're trying to get in his face. Because a certain type of fighter, and a lot of fighters, if you hit them hard, will go, oh, I better not crowd him again, when really that was your key to victory. So guys like that, the Willie Peps and the defensive savants of the world, they tend to save their punching power for when they have to make the other guy respect it. And with Lerone Murphy, I saw him land some good strikes in this fight, particularly the elbows. I loved the elbows. But they were all on the counter, going backwards while seeming to run away from Emmett. Using the elbows on the counter is the perfect way to deal with someone who's got massive hitting ability and a great chin. Think of Corey Sandhagen versus Song Yudong, a very recent example. But if you don't think you can knock a guy out with one good punch as he comes in, and you worry that standing there to throw one good punch is going to allow him to sloppily drag you into a scrappy exchange where he lands 2 or 3, elbows are a great answer. Because if you use elbows correctly, you're essentially doing a folding guard. You're getting down behind your upper arms and shoulders, so you can make it quite safe for yourself, provided you don't really overreach on the elbow and let your head whip back. But also the ability to just slash people open, that improves your odds of doing anything effective in the fight. If they're bleeding into their eyes, you can punch them a lot more. So Leroy Murphy did a beautiful counter elbow. It was such a cool little sequence because he was fighting with the elbows high. Some people call it like a triangle guard, but this is something John Haggerty does a bit in one championship. He did it against Rodtang when he was hurt in their first fight. And Rodtang obviously known for having an iron jaw. You don't plan on knocking him out, but if you can spike him with some elbows, you might cut him, and then it makes your job a lot easier. And of course, the fight can be stopped by the doctor due to the cut, but the bleeding into the eye, well, bleeding generally is a really good look on for the judges if nothing's happening. But bleeding into your eye makes it hard to see other stuff coming, so people can start wailing on you with punches, kicks, knees, whatever. So Haggerty was doing this thing where he adopted a high guard with his hands on the top of his head, basically. And he would sort of move in as if to headbutt Rodtang with his elbow out in front. So you sort of frame your hand on your own head, point your elbow at them, and then try and headbutt them. And if they're moving on to you, you'll do some real damage. So this one that cut Emmett open, he lunged in the way that he does, jab, overhand, jab, overhand, jab, overhand. He lunged in. Leroy Murphy had both elbows up. He spiked him with the left elbow. They collided heads, and then he hit him with a chopping right elbow. So 3 bone-on-bone connections there, and the commentators were trying to decide which one cut Emmett open. Aside from that, it was largely going backwards, high guard, the odd sort of slapping counterpunch, calf kicks. But it was a very, I want to say, negative performance. It was giving ground constantly to land some counters, but mainly just not letting Emmett do anything of his own, which is that's the correct way to fight a big hitter, in the sense that you're taking away what they can do. But when you don't do much yourself, especially if it looks early on like you've really landed some good blows on this guy, that's going to raise a lot of questions. It was good to see Emmett use his wrestling because he has a tendency of becoming just a one-dimensional swang and banger who doesn't have an awful lot of ideas on the feet. Massive high crotch pickup in the first round, threw Leroy Murphy over his head. But Murphy's get-ups were brilliant. I mean, it seems reductive to just call him like a small Leon Edwards, which people are now doing, but he doesn't get a whole heap of finishes. He's very technically good in a way that annoys people because he's not getting a lot of finishes. He isn't a huge activity fighter. You can see why the comparisons draw themselves. But his get-ups were really good in this one. I mean, in a couple of fights ago, he used a beautiful octopus guard get-up, which is where you go like elbow underneath their armpit, high onto their back, and start sitting up. You see that in basically every UFC event now. This one, he did a beautiful... he was in closed guard, used the back of his tricep and elbow to take Emmett's head offline, started sitting up. Emmett pushed him back, and he got the cross wrist, opened his legs, and did the cross wrist get-up that we're always talking about from bottom half guard. If you want to learn more about cross wrist get-up, go watch my video on the YouTube channel about Linton Vassell. I liked that Emmett was eventually starting to close him down. I think Emmett could have done better with more like low kicks to cut him off. I think Emmett could have done better using the jab a bit more. He is jab, overhand, jab, overhand, jab, overhand. But a great example of someone who used the jab when maybe he was like the lesser pure boxer, less smooth out fighter. You think I'm going to say Roberto Duran, because I always do, but just the other week in Bivol versus Beterbiev, for most of the early going of that fight, all he really landed was he'd flick the jab out in front of Bivol's face, and then he'd step in and throw a second jab into the solar plexus. So he'd do like a double jab, stepping on the second jab. And he racked up some points. He did a little bit of attritive damage to the body. He made it clear to Bivol that he had some weapons out in the open, in the outfight. And then he started to use that to close in on Bivol and get him towards the ropes. And then every time that Bivol circled along the ropes, he'd throw the right hand at him. And that's the sort of... I mean, it's not a one-to-one thing because that's boxing and this is MMA. That's in a ring where there are 90-degree corners. This is in a 8-sided cage where the corners are much less shallow. But very simple technique, not saying easy, but very simple technique. Jab, body jab, or double jab, to maneuver the guy towards the boundary so that you can hit him clean moving along the boundary. And Emmett did have a couple of good right hands go in, across the top overhand rights as Murphy was circling. He was stumped a little bit by Murphy's high guard because Murphy was expecting that big overhand and kept his elbows really high as a result. But that's when, go watch Beterbiev versus Bivol. The whole fight, particularly the rounds that Beterbiev did best in, is him following trying to cut Bivol off, letting Bivol circle to his right, and then throwing either the overhand or the wide right to the body, or the right straight to the body, or the right straight to the head. 4 different punches, same wind-up or lack of wind-up, same sort of movement, 4 slightly different targets, or, they're all different from each other, but 2 slightly different targets to the head, 2 slightly different targets to the body. A ton of variety in what seems like a very simple, repetitive plan. But Josh Emmett ain't about that jabbing life really effectively, and he ain't about that body-hitting life in most of his fights, which is a real shame. He's taken on the role of Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens knocked him out and gave him the power of being the incredibly powerful gatekeeper who, if you're smart and a good fighter, you can get past, and if you're not, you might get knocked out. Though I suspect his knockout rate is much higher than Jeremy Stephens, because Jeremy Stephens was like the biggest puncher at 145, but couldn't stop anyone because he just swung wildly. That's the thing about punching. You do have to hit them to actually have effect. So I think that's enough time on that main event. People were arguing about the judging, but honestly, I don't care. If Emmett won, great. If Murphy won, great. Murphy's probably not going to fight for another 6 months or more. I believe Emmett's career is slowing down because he's had like a knee reconstruction since he knocked out Bryce Mitchell, which seems like forever ago. And he's 40 years old at featherweight. But then this is the thing. I saw a lot of people talking about this afterwards, saying like, I struggled to see Lerone Murphy beating any top 5 ranked featherweights or whatever. Yair Rodriguez is in the top 5 despite fighting like once every 3 years. And he looks alternately really impressive and not that great. Brian Ortega is number 6 ranked in the world. And he's, done like one... And he's won like 1 fight in the last 5 years. Featherweight top 10, don't look at it, mate. It'll depress you. It's an island featherweight in the middle of the good lower weight classes in the UFC. There's the island of featherweight where sod all is happening. Mind you, top end of lightweight is completely log jammed now. Bantamweight is still where everything happens. And then flyweight is a couple of good guys, a couple of Jesus Aguilars and CJ Vergara's and Lacerdas. Co-main was Pat Sabatini versus Joanderson Brito. What more do you want to know about this fight, aside from the fact that Joanderson Brito fought like a meathead? Just came out swanging and banging. Well, no, he came out for the 3rd round swanging and banging and got easily taken down. Pat Sabatini was not going to strike with this guy. It was pretty obvious. But he came out, threw a hard body kick. And Joanderson Brito said, hold on a minute, try my body kick. And then Pat Sabatini just stepped in and took him down easily off this kick. And I think he did it in the 2nd round too. Basically played top half the entire fight, didn't really land anything, didn't really threaten anything. Bit boring, especially as I love Pat Sabatini because he's normally quite a fun grappler. Chang Ho Lee, they were calling him Korean Habib, fought a guy called Cortavius Romeus, amazing, possibly best name in the UFC. Back and forth, eventually got on top, stopped him with strikes from Mount. I mean, it was good. He cut him open like really early with, I think it was an elbow across the brow, but that was one of the more remarkable finishes on this card, and I barely have anything to say about it. Brad Tavares versus Gerald Meerschaert was absolute shite, as you'd expect. This one, like, if you're the matchmakers of the UFC, Brad Tavares has been in the UFC for 15 years. He has kept like an 85% takedown defense rate. It might have dropped a little bit lower in recent years, but there was a time when the top takedown defense in the UFC, for people with over 4 fights or whatever it was Jose Aldo, John Jones, Brad Tavares. And Brad Tavares always stuck out on that list because, he was a sort of middle-of-the-pack guy. The guy's harder to double-leg than a horse. So they put him in with Gerald Meerschaert, a grappler whose takedowns are horrible. Which would be really exciting, or an easy matchup to expect a good finish from, if Brad Tavares was like a big hitter or something. But Brad Tavares is also one of the worst finishers in UFC history. I think he's got 2 in 15 years with the company. So if you saw this on the card beforehand, you'd go, and you knew anything about fighting, you'd go, that's probably not going to be very good. bet the decision. But the UFC matchmakers were like, oh, this is a banger. Ernie Osborne knocked out Luis Gurul in a fight that was not tremendously interesting. Torres Vinny pissed off everyone. This dude, I only knew him from the memes because I don't watch the Contender Series. Unbelievably dull fighter. And he was fighting Robert Valentin, who's also not very good. And not from the Contender Series, he's from the Ultimate Fighter. But I remember seeing this dude for the first time and seeing all the runes on his chest, and I was like, oh, I'm going to learn about some new neo-Nazi groups, which is always a treat in covering MMA. But at present, I don't think he is a neo-Nazi. If he starts dating Andrea Lee, that'll be confirmation. But yeah, this was just awful. Torres Vinny took him down over and over again. Didn't throw a single strike. Robert Valentin tried to get up, was largely unsuccessful. His striking on the feet was pretty terrible because he was just stepping forward and throwing punches, like straight punches at where you would be if you were standing up, not anticipating that he's got a shorter opponent who's also going to level change. So rather than like showing him some knees or faking the uppercut a few times and then trying to uppercut him when he level changed, he's just going, I'm on my feet, I better throw something, and then getting easily taken down. But he did land some good elbows on the in the scrambles along the fence and stuff. But Tony Weeks, boxing referee who also judges MMA fights, important boxing referee because by letting Cotto work his way out of clinches against Floyd Mayweather, he gave us one of two Mayweather fights where that was allowed, and also Mayweather's hardest fight. Mayweather famously has Kenny Bayless ref all his fights, and Kenny Bayless, as soon as Floyd sort of puts his hands on the opponent's back, Kenny Bayless goes, clinch, break, and puts them back way away from each other, back to outfighting range. If guys are actually allowed to work, Floyd has a harder time. As the other fight that wasn't reffed by Kenny Bayless was the Maidana fight, and Maidana was not good at like scientifically breaking the clinch, as Cotto was, but he just kept swinging when he was tied up, or when Kenny Bayless would say he was tied up, he just kept swinging. So the rematch they got Kenny Bayless in for, and every time Floyd touched this guy's back, Kenny Bayless is like, stop, halt, break, have 5 seconds to recompose yourselves, start the fight over. Anyway, Tony Weeks judged this fight a 30-27, was it 30-27 for Robert Valentin? Very, very funny. Because if you go by the words of the judging, I think I was talking about this when Makayev fought Charles Johnson. Damage is the most important factor. If one guy is just holding or just performing takedowns and trying to hold top position, and the other guy is actually throwing elbows, he should win on damage if by the wording of the rules. I'm not saying that's what I want to see. I'm just saying that not doing any damage should be punished. Not trying to finish this guy in any way. So I hope Torres Vinny gets cut even though he won. Absolutely dreadful. Anything else on this card worth talking about? Victor Henry actually did do a good performance. He was the sole light spot on this card. He was fighting a guy called Falcao who tried to take him down over and over again and succeeded. But Victor Henry, Josh Barnett student, known more for his striking. He's an incredibly voluminous striker. As much volume in his striking as he has in his hair. And he has a really tough job because what he had in this fight was he's going to have to get up to apply the volume. Applying volume, as in throwing lots of strikes, opens you up to being taken down. So his game was always going to have to be outlasting Falcao. And he actually did a really good job of it. And by the third round, he's really pouring it on. But it's a lot to ask. Luckily, Victor Henry is very good at getting up. He's one of the fighters that I kind of like Ricardo Lamas and Mansour Barnoui and a few others. There are a few fighters who I want to see in bad positions just because they work really well from them. And it's not going to win them a fight, but I do just love that from the technical perspective. So there was a lot of like cross-wrist get-ups in this fight. There was some lovely turtle work. There was a kind of like Ricardo Lamas. He did a wrap the head sort of reverse knee shield, wrong side butterfly, whatever you want to call it. Get the fuck up guard is what I normally call it. But yeah, that was that card. PFL had an event on as well, which actually was pretty decent. Jesus Pinedo and Gabriel Braga, who were the finalists of the featherweight tournament last time around, both finished their opponents. Braga beat Frederic Dumas. Dupras. This was an interesting theme sort of for the weekend. Bad guillotines, because Joe Anderson Brito, he let Pat Sabatini shoot on him and then he jumped to Gilly. He just grabbed the Gilly and went, I've got this. And he didn't, because against most high-level fighters, it's very hard to guillotine them. Particularly ones who are strong wrestlers who have also become known for strong grappling. Like the one thing they're going to see over and over again is people trying to guillotine them. But Frederick Dupras against or Dupras versus Gabriel Braga took him down, had him sort of sitting up along the fence trying to wall walk, and he jumped up over his head, grabbed a guillotine, and fell back on it. So he completely gave up position. He was very confident in it, and then Braga's head slipped out, and he just battered him until he turned his back, and Braga got on his back and choked him. So he started with a tremendous advantage, and by trying to do a guillotine from maybe where he shouldn't have, in a way that he shouldn't have, he got himself finished shortly afterwards. But you can use a guillotine from the top. There's no one says you have to dive to your back or let the guy roll up into you. Just the other week, Sean Brady's getting pretty famous for this now. He's got a couple of finishes over decent grapplers, even in grappling competition, with this guillotine from the top position. I've been watching tons of Marcelo Garcia lately. He attacks guillotines from everywhere. But going to your back with the guillotine, generally not a great idea. But then equally, Thad Jean, who fought Murkamed Berkamov in PFL this weekend. Berkamov, very good fighter. His only losses are in like his debut as a pro years ago, back in like 2013. And then against Lorenz Larkin, who's like about the best welterweight outside the UFC. Because the UFC randomly said, we don't actually think you're fun enough, even though he's actually a really interesting, exciting fighter. It was him and Jorge Masvidal that was one of the best unwatched undercard fights you'll ever see. Just really high-level stuff between two guys who were good but not appreciated. And Larkin went to Bellator and smashed a load of people but didn't get any attention. And Masvidal sort of lucked into this streak of 3 big wins that elevated him into superstar status. But anyway, Thad Jean, interesting switch hitter. Berkamov shoots a takedown on him. Thad Jean wraps the neck for a guillotine. And this is the thing about the guillotine. It can be really useful. The problem is knowing when you've got it or you haven't. Because if you have got it, I mean, it is as simple as you've got it or you haven't. If you have got it, you are probably not tapping the guy immediately anyway. He's probably going to pretend you haven't got it. And that's when guys give it up. Which is why there's also this problem of guys not having it. They just like wrapped your head and then they squeeze their arse off. And then they realise they haven't got it and the guy's head pops out. It's as simple as getting some of your arm or wrist or hand on their throat and having something on the back of their head so that you can squeeze it all together. When it's broken down to its basic level, it's something that you snap up in the course of movement. But that gene had it here, and Berkamov was trying to pretend he didn't. And then Berkamov starts sort of rolling himself over the top from top position. He starts going, I want to be on my back, actually. And that's when, oh, yeah, you've got it. So Thad Jean used it to get up and then proceeded to knock Berkamov out. Another theme this weekend was open stance lead hooks. So Thad Jean was orthodox against a southpaw. Hit him with a left hook over the top as he turned. And then Jesus Pinedo in the co-main event of this one knocked out Adam Boric, who's never been stopped before, as fought just about everyone outside the UFC. And Pinedo basically stopped him by pursuing him and catching him with southpaw right hooks as he pivoted around. And then the main event was Jason Jackson versus Andrei Koreshkov. Jason Jackson has a good case of being one of the best welterweights outside the UFC. He would do very well within the UFC, I imagine. But this was crazy. He was doing his usual stuff. He's doing well. He gets behind Koreshkov on the mat in sort of the turtle. Koreshkov's head is down. He elbows him straight in the back of the head, enough to open a giant cut on the back of Koreshkov's head. So Koreshkov's bleeding out the back of his head. They stop the fight for the 5 minutes or whatever to recover. And then Keith Peterson goes over to Jason Jackson and goes, don't do it again. And then immediately as they start the action again, Jason Jackson takes him down, gets on top and chokes him in a way that he hadn't looked anywhere near able to do up to that point in the fight. If you elbow the skin on the back of the guy's head open and you don't take a point, and they don't take a point, that's just where MMA is now. It's crazy. You can do whatever you like. So trash fights, trash company, trash officiating. But I've decided I'm going to come back tomorrow on the Patreon to do a Q&A for the Patreon boys on account of going fairly short on this episode. Additionally, if you're a Patreon boy, check out the George Foreman article I wrote. Farewell, Big George, or Goodbye, Big George. Can't remember what I called it, but just talking about George Foreman, what he was good at, his techers, what made him so interesting, and just being a little bit wistful for the golden age of boxing or the golden age of heavyweight boxing I think he's sort of the last one left. Ron Lyle? No, Ron Lyle died a few years ago. Anyway, I'm your boy Jack Slag. Sign up to the Patreon. Support the podcast. Be a boy. Save me, Volkanovski versus Lopez. Bless.